Good morning. We are live on the Coast to Coast Football Podcast as we do every Friday morning at 9 o'clock. We are live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. We've got lots to talk about today. Halfway through the season already. We've got draft information coming up. We've got trade deadline. We've got coaches getting the axe. We've got all kinds of stuff. First off, I want to say my name is Scott Kennedy. I go by Scout Kennedy on the old Twix machine. You can find me there. I'm in Atlanta. This guy over here, Nick Kendall, he is in Seattle. So we are coast to coast with your football coverage. Nick, how are you doing this morning, my friend? Thank you for getting up nice and early with us.
Doing pretty well. Had a first baby course last night, so that was pretty fun. A little infant CPR. So I'm scared straight right now after all that stuff. So that's fun. Everything's a choking hazard, so that's always good. And it was a 3-hour course, so I have not been in the classroom for a while, so I'm recovering right now. That's all I could say. I'm doing
You
well.
just got to remember that there's about 6 billion people on Earth, and we're actually fairly tough individuals, despite the fact that we think everything is going to end our children's, well-being out there. So we get along okay. And as a Gen Xer, you just have to think back to how we grew up,
Yeah.
laying flat against the car window. What was a seatbelt, for
No.
goodness sakes? The
Yeah.
feral kids roaming the world, terrorizing in groups of 8 to 10 on our bicycles all across the county. You're like, yeah, I try and remember that every so often when I get a little too parenty.
Anxious.
It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
good
Yeah.
Lord, we
Yeah.
waste ourselves for God's sakes.
Yeah, it's coming though. So those classes will be here and there coming up in the rest of November. So time's gonna fly by. I'm excited, but man,
Oh
it's a
God,
lot.
we're way off the rails already, y'all. I apologize. Speaking of scared straight, it was biology class. I was in 10th grade and they were doing like the meaning of life thing. It was a sex education. I show this woman in labor. They're scrolling down and scrolling down and scrolling down. And I'm like, all right, they're going to stop, right? I mean, we're kids. We can't see this. Nope. All
Yeah.
the way down to that kid being born.
Uh,
I was 15. I did not have my first child until I was 36 years old. I was scared straight for 20 years.
We saw a video like that, but in fourth grade. So I
Oh,
was I
good
was very
Lord.
young. Yeah, I
I
was
was
very.
just mortified. Like, this looks like aliens. Ah.
This,
John
the circle of
Harrell
life.
coming in, keeping us straight here. We certainly appreciate it. Good morning, Scott, Nick, and the crew. That's all, y'all. Thanks for being here, John. Silas Draven, he's saying good morning, Falcons family. That's all, y'all. And Dave is coming in. Good morning. He says, good morning, guys. Interesting and ironic podcast today. I know it's only a 2-game sample size, but the Titans may have something there at quarterback. And he follows that up with a nice super chat. Appreciate it. He says, I'm sure Falcons fan realize that finding the next franchise quarterback will not be easy. What do you think about that, Nick?
I mean, it's the golden ticket, right? If you don't have that guy, you are wandering the desert for whatever many years. Sorry, I don't remember my religious reference there, but that's yeah. Finding a franchise quarterback, teams can do it over and over again forever and not get it. So once you have one, I think you got to really definitely appreciate it. Uh, but yeah, it's not going to be easy. That said, some teams, just consistently luck into it too. I mean, the Packers having the run of, Star back a long time ago, obviously, but then, Favre and Rodgers looks like now they're actually dealing with it. I mean, Packers fans, I mean, it's not to take too much joy on their pain, but like they're freaking out. It's like, oh my God, we're the worst ever. This is what it's like.
Yeah,
And I've been there.
this is how the rest of us feel between quarterbacks. You don't get 3 quarterbacks for 50 years
No.
of that level. It's pretty insane. It's almost like it's a little bit like the Steelers. I think the Steelers have only had 3 coaches in
Yeah.
100 years.
Yeah.
It doesn't work like that for most of us.
No.
Most of us out there. Dave, certainly appreciate it. I'll tell you one thing that bothers me, Dave, amongst the fandom out there is this thought amongst a lot of people, and I don't see this with Desmond Ridder really at all. There's some of it out there, though, that simply if you just give a quarterback enough time, he will automatically become the guy. Well, we gave up on him too early, or we didn't develop him. My God, most of these guys just aren't ever going to be good enough. That's not their fault. This is a tough damn game.
Yeah.
More time isn't going to put in what God left out. It's just the way you're willing to be more patient with when you see the tools out there and you see the ability. Okay, maybe it'll click, but it's a win now type of game, and a lot of these guys just flat out aren't going to make it, no matter how much time you give them.
Yeah, it's That's the reality of it. I mean, a lot of times fans will really dig in their heels because the faith is runs strong with especially highly drafted quarterbacks. And you just got to do this, and then they'll be good. Well, if you have to give all these, variables and parameters for them to succeed, maybe they aren't actually that good. Uh, a lot of times you can tell within the first year what they're going to be. You don't see guys really a lot of times take drastic turnarounds based on what they have shown so far. I mean, we talk about Will Levis already. The stats haven't been great, but you've seen the flashes, and that Tennessee offensive line is dreadful. I mean, Andre Dillard. If you want Will Levis to enjoy the rest of his life, get Andre Dillard off of left tackle. My God, he is dreadful. But yeah, it's typically you can tell pretty early on. And it doesn't mean that, again, Ritter is not going to be a good quarterback or a serviceable quarterback, but is he going to be a franchise level quarterback or an elite quarterback? The future's not written, but I would say it's highly, highly, highly improbable based on what we've seen.
There's obviously exceptions to the rule, but trying to hit on a day 2, day 3 quarterback is hard. It's how many of those guys you have to go through to finally get to one. Well, Tom Brady on a small enough sample size, I'll prove anything you want to. I'll go to Walmart and find a guy stocking groceries, and I'm gonna get my Super Bowl MVP. That's where you need to find them, right? Kurt Warner, it's insane.
It was Hy-Vee. It was.
I know what it was, but I can never remember Hy-Vee, and nobody from south of wherever the hell you're from knows what the hell a Hy-Vee is.
Oh, I miss Hy-Vee. That was the best. Sponsors the Iowa State game and Iowa Nebraska. But I digress.
Like I said, as I would say.
I always like to say just a little bit more mathy on that. Your numerator is only as good as your denominator, right? So like if you have 1 out of a billion, so you're saying there's a chance. Well, that's the reason there's all these busts in the first round at quarterback. Well, look around the league. I mean, maybe because Tom Brady won half the Super Bowls for 20 years, it's like, first rounders don't win. Yeah, it's like, well, that kind of messes with the sample size a little bit. Maybe you should look at the broader sample size like we talked about, I think Wednesday, Scott, looking at teams that make the division championships. A lot of first-round quarterbacks. I mean, even in the last decade, how many quarterbacks drafted outside of round 1 are quality starters right now? I mean, you have Brock Purdy. I don't even know if I'd call him quality.
Yeah, the jury's still out on Brock Purdy. The sample size is starting to balance out a little bit. Jalen Hurts was an early second.
Yes, Hurts, Dak Prescott. After that, I can't think of any in the last decade that have been drafted. You had Kirk Cousins, who was drafted over a decade ago. I think Derek Carr was drafted over a decade ago now. You have Russell Wilson, definitely drafted over a decade ago. I mean, the NFL is actually pretty good at identifying the haves and have-nots. It's just that in the first round, you're still dealing with a, 50-50 coin flip. It's just better than a, 1 out of trying to roll a Yahtzee, I guess, essentially.
My other favorite one is you can't take a quarterback from that school. They've never won a Super Bowl. I'm like, Jesus Christ, man. Between Troy Aikman, Joe Montana, and Tom Brady, there's about a third of the Super Bowls.
Yeah. I mean, I love it too.
There's about a third. Out of 50, you've got maybe 35, maybe 30 schools have won Super Bowls.
Before Patrick Mahomes, there had not been a single quarterback from the Big 12 to win an NFL playoff game. The Big 12, it's been around for a bit.
Just a playoff game at all?
At all.
I'm claiming Troy Aikman for that one. He went to Oklahoma.
I think they were the Big 8 then. But but that's it's crazy. It is wild, and that's why you don't helmet scout. I mean, we saw that with another example of that was the Tedford quarterbacks. Oh, they all bust. Dilfer, whatever. Aaron Rodgers is going to suck because he's a Tedford quarterback. Well, he played pretty damn well there for a bit. Definitely a first ballot Hall of Famer. So individuals, right? It's about the individual.
Scout the player, not the uniform, et cetera, et cetera. You take scheme into it again. You take scheme into it a little bit because stats don't matter. I do want to see touchdown interception ratio. I do want to see decision making, and all that will play into stats.
Yeah.
But again, it's very different offenses coming out of college. Mark Schrader, always good for us. He says, good morning for you. Good to you. Tyler Brooks says, good morning. Can this team honestly make a Super Bowl run this year? Tyler, you're coming in on my generic Facebook page. I think I remember, we see you enough that you're Broncos fan, not Falcons, but I am not positive on that one.
I think the answer is
that
the same.
said, I don't think either one of them are making a Super Bowl run. The answer is no.
Yeah. The NFL is wide open this season, but I feel like both teams have enough holes that you probably are not going to see a Super Bowl run. I would say the Falcons have a better shot just because you're not going to have to go through a gauntlet of unbelievable quarterbacks to get there. Not to, obviously trying to get through Dallas and Eagles is going to be hard, Detroit, but I think the Falcons do have a shot. Defense playing well. If run game gets hot in the cold weather games, certainly possible, but Super Bowl run, I mean, let's
Super
get to the
Bowl
playoffs.
contenders for me right now, Nick. I'm looking at standings. AFC, Dolphins, Bills, Ravens, Jaguars. I would put the Jaguars in there, honestly, as a team capable of winning it.
Chiefs.
NFC, Eagles, Cowboys, Lions, 49ers.
We got the 49ers in there. You did not say the Chiefs?
I said, if I didn't, I meant to.
Okay, because there's 5 teams in the AFC. Yeah.
If I didn't, I meant to. For Dolphins, Bills, Ravens, Jaguars. Oh, I didn't go down to the Chiefs. There's another division. Chiefs, 5, yeah. So I didn't say the Chiefs. I finished with Jaguars. I meant Chiefs, absolutely. That was just a mistake on my part.
Yeah, it's all good. Did you say the Cowboys?
I did.
Okay, Cowboys. The one that I'm not sure about right now that I'm enjoying watching. You mentioned the Eagles. You mentioned the Lions. I am still TBD on the Seahawks. That's one that
I didn't say Seahawks.
They're just on. I mean, they play the Ravens this week, right? If they go in there and play up tough against the Ravens, we might have something here. Geno Smith is playing so good. Seth Waldron, their offensive coordinator, I mean, his scheme he's a Shanahan disciple, so he might actually, just from that title, right, get some looks this offseason. But they're doing some good things. I mean, what he's done with Geno Smith, they're explosive. They played almost the entire season without their tackles, and they're still out there doing it. I mean, that's Seahawks are an interesting team. It hurts me because they're, the Russell Wilson situation to say that here, but they're a fun team too. So borderline, I wouldn't have them there, but we'll see what happens.
Jacqueline Galloway coming in with a super sticker over on YouTube. Thank you so much for the support of the show, Jackie. Appreciate you coming in. And Tyler, I thought you were a Broncos fan. Clarifies Broncos fan. No, I've been harping all week about the Denver Broncos that they've turned the corner, but that means they're headed in the right direction. If they beat the Bills in Buffalo, I'll start considering them a playoff team. But until then, they dug themselves too big a hole that they have to win this game now, really, to be a playoff team, or you fall to 3-6 and you're in deep trouble. But no, I don't consider this team a Super Bowl contender, no matter what. That'd be something. I mean, if you go out and beat Kansas City and the Bills in back-to-back weeks, I guess you would be a Super Bowl contender. But oh man, that seems crazy. Let me see. We got some old Gen X conversations in here, et cetera, et cetera. Smart Ride comes in. Believe he's talking Falcons here. He says, Scott and Nick, great morning. Our fans need to realize rebuilding isn't easy and you can't get stuck on one guy. The organization has a major problem with drafting and hiring. It could be a long ride. That fits for a lot of people. We could be talking Chicago Bears. We could talk about the Detroit Lions finally turning the corner. We could be looking at the Arizona Cardinals, who have been stuck in the quagmire for a long time. We could be talking about the Las Vegas Raiders. Speaking of which, Nick, in this case, I think we're talking about the Atlanta Falcons.
Mm-hmm.
One of the big news, I would say this qualifies as the biggest news. We've had our first firing of the year with Josh McDaniels out in Las Vegas. And that he got fired isn't really a surprise. That he got hired to begin with 18 months ago or whatever it is should have been a surprise, because he's been such a failure outside of New England, wherever he's set foot, and he keeps getting chances and people keep paying him a ton of money. And it's just insanity. It really is. I'm happy for the Las Vegas Raiders fans that you are out from under that cloud. But if Mark Davis is still making those types of decisions, it's going to be tough to get better.
They're in a weird situation too, because they are not a cash-rich franchise. They actually might be one of the poorest in the NFL. I mean, one of the reasons that they had to move Khalil Mack was because they didn't have the ability to put the money in furlough to pay him that huge contract. And they're paying Gruden now. They're going to have to pay McDaniels a lot of money for years now, which hamstrings them too. So despite, being in Vegas and that beautiful new stadium and everything, they don't really have the money to throw money at things to fix problems.
Hire way out of problems.
But also, build the infrastructure, the training facilities, the scouting staff. I mean, we're talking about a team that has probably less resources than most of the top college teams right here at the NFL. So it'll be interesting to follow them still. I mean, the Bengals are kind of in the similar situation. They're not really a cash rich franchise, but once you hit that quarterback, things can reset there and you get a shot there. So they're a totally dysfunctional team. I have no love for Josh McDaniels.
You can tell I don't.
Yeah. He's with the Denver stuff was rough, and he's always been a little bit cocky, so a wonderkind, if you will. But that's he's out now. I'm a little surprised at the timing of this. The thing that really doesn't make sense is you fire him, you fire Dave Ziegler, the general manager, but you sit there at the trade deadline with all these expensive older assets. You don't move any of them. I mean, this is a team that needs to probably. I mean, we talk about it a lot with the Broncos, but like the Raiders need to freaking tear it down too. So, I mean, Devontae Adams, he's not happy there. Josh Jacobs wanted to be gone all off season. You have some assets that would fetch some stuff on the market as well. So, I don't know. I don't know what the Raiders are doing. As long as Mark Davis is owning them, they're probably going to be a volatile, erratic franchise. So I guess that's great because I don't like the Raiders one bit. But it is they're definitely a disorganized franchise.
This is kind of an unfair question because you typically do know this stuff, but the thing is so do I, and this still caught me by surprise. So I'm cheating here. I'm leading the witness. Okay. Who's their highest cap hit player in 2023 for the Raiders?
Highest cap hit player? The dark horse would be Derek Carr with the dead cap.
Yeah, no, but just plain cap hit. Not dead, but plain cap hit.
Colton Miller?
Colton Miller.
Oh, I knew he signed a big contract. Yeah.
You got it right. No, their dead caps right now are 12.5 Chandler Jones. Derek Carr's only 5. When they signed him, that deal was not what it was meant out to be. They could absolutely move on. But Colton Miller has a 17.7 cap hit. Devontae Adams is only at 14 with a base salary of 6. Those escalate. I would have to imagine those are going to escalate in a big way moving to 2024 and being able to get out from under him. Speaking of escalation, Jimmy G's dead cap hit moves up to 28, and his cap hit is 28.5 next year. Devontae Adams' cap hit moves up to 25. Max Crosby's cap hit moves up to 25. Now, how old is Max Crosby? I think you're still going to want to hang on to him for as long as you possibly can. He's just 26 years old. You could have another 10 years of Max Crosby. But Devontae Adams, on the other hand, is someone you probably could have moved as well. So if we're picking winners and losers from the trade deadline, could throw in the Raiders. Could throw the Raiders in there. Now, we talked beginning of the show and in the before we get into some draft stuff, we wanted to talk some trade deadline. I guess the biggest newsmakers were probably the Washington Commanders. Let's start in San Francisco. San Francisco sent a 3rd-round pick, which is probably going to be in the 85 to 90 range.
I think it was a compensatory pick, so it's going to be in the
95 range.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it was even their comp pick, which is at the very end of the 3rd round, no matter where they finish.
I'm pretty sure
it was in the 95 range. Good move for the San Francisco 49ers, even though that it's a rental of sorts with the possibility of re-signing, having exclusive negotiations. I think this is a good move for the 49ers. It's pretty low risk, and there's some good reward there with Chase Young.
Yeah, I mean, they could even, if he's playing, Scott, I know that we kind of talked about this, but from the tape that I watched, the tools and the traits look like they're back. For me, watching him, his advanced stats, like his pass rush win rate and his pressures, like based on his snap count, have been all about in the top 10 in the NFL so far this season. I mean, he looks like he could take off, but then after the fact, you have, I want to say it was Mike Silver came out, a longtime NFL reporter who has a lot of connections to the Commanders and Ron Rivera, talking about how there were some issues with Chase Young kind of going rogue on plays, not playing within the defense, kind of chasing stats versus, okay, you need to set the edge here. Okay, he's cutting inside, looking to try to get pressure rather than doing that. Well, guess what? Then you're getting whipped on the outside there, and you're not doing your assignment, and the whole thing falls apart from a run defense approach. So apparently there were some issues there. We'll see what happens going forward. I know the 49ers have, his name's escaping me right now, but the 49ers have an absolutely fantastic defensive line coach who is very well thought of, Chris Kokoric. I know I've seen that name many times. He's somebody who's considered a great up-and-comer and has done a lot of good stuff with defensive line. It's also a defensive line that has many other dudes on it that'll keep him in line. I mean, you got his former college teammate who went 1 or 2 drafts before him, and Nick Bosa. You got Javon Hargrave, who's seen a thing or two now, signed that huge contract. Eric Armstead has been there too. So Chase Young doesn't have to be the savior of the guy. He just has to go out there and, again, do your job, and those guys will get on him if he doesn't. So I think it's a low risk trade, and if he plays well, guess what, Scott? They let him go. You're going to get what they traded for him back in a comp pick. So
That's true.
Yeah, it's
That's
crazy.
True. They have a ton of money in free agency, so they might not be able to get him back because they might sign some of their own free agents. But that is a good point on playing the comp pick game. Want to come back to Montez Sweat, but I want to take care of Troy here, who's taking care of us with a super chat. Going to jump you right to the top of the queue. He says, "Hey guys, how do some coaches like Mike Tomlin, Pittsburgh Steelers, seem to get teams with different players every year to play well? Scheme, motivation, culture, adapting to player skills." I would say all of that plus your scouting department. When you've got your scheme and culture in place and you've got guys out there looking for players that will fit in, and what I'm saying is when you've got scouts out there who know exactly what you're looking for to help you be successful, it makes it easier.
And it goes beyond the scheme, as you mentioned. It's the culture too. I mean, how many times when we're doing the draft show, Scott, we're like, this guy feels like a Steeler. This guy feels like a Baltimore Raven. I mean, it's just, yeah, really. I mean, it is an identity, and the fact that they've had such consistency over the years. You mentioned the scouts know exactly the type of person, the traits that they're looking for, the measurables, the scheme fit down to the wire, and that matters over years. The teams that really just can't get it right are the ones that are revolving doors at quarterback. Okay, we're playing a 3-4 cover 3 base defense. No, actually, we're going now more to a 4-2-5 Vic Fangio defense. We're running the Shanahan West Coast. No, actually, we're going to do more a little power spread here. Mismatching year after year. Well, this guy used to fit, but now he's at one draft class away, and guess what? He's worthless now because he was an off-ball cornerback drafted 3rd round. So that's definitely something to it. I also think that Tomlin does a great job of identifying coaches and putting coaches in good position to succeed historically. The one caveat here is that while the Steelers have been good, it's kind of like the Bill Belichick thing. When they were great, they were tied to a Hall of Fame level quarterback. So I mean, coaches do matter, Scott. Obviously, I do believe that too. But at the end of the day, if you don't have the guy at center, it's going to be pretty damn hard in the NFL.
But for me, though, they haven't had that guy for a long time. Because Roethlisberger at the end of his career wasn't that guy.
Yeah, and they've been good, but not.
He was playing well, but he wasn't where he was in his prime. But they were still winning games. So I feel like growing up with the Atlanta Hawks in the '80s, there was a 50-win team, a second round out, but they could never get over the hump of the Boston Celtics to the Detroit Pistons to the Chicago Bulls. The Steelers are kind of in that spot right now where they're good because they've got a good nucleus. They've got a great coach. You can take a couple chances on a guy like George Pickens, who comes in with motivational concerns. That's why he falls to the second round, and drop him in a culture where he's going to have to rise or get out, like the Steelers. Now compare them with, say, the Cincinnati Bengals under Marvin Lewis. Anytime there was a discipline problem, they all went to Cincinnati, and it was hard. That was unsustainable. But when you've got Mike Tomlin there, a player's coach who's going to be fair and is in charge, they play better than the sum of their parts right now. Now I just wonder, Nick, can you bring in enough players to the Steelers to take advantage where they can get back over that hump and be an AFC contender again? Because right now I just think of them as a perennial 10-7 team, first round out, because they don't have the horses to beat the AFC superpowers right now.
Don't have the horses. I think Kenny Pickett is just okay from what I've seen. I don't think he's a difference maker. And he's one of those ones. It's kind of like Daniel Jones-esque, where it's like, okay, he's on his rookie contract. We can maybe do some things around him with his rookie contract, but he's definitely not looking like a quarterback that is going to be worthy of a good second contract. Now, things can change, obviously, and also the Pittsburgh Steelers fans hate their offensive coordinator in Matt Canada. They hate him, and he's not very good either. So we'll see what happens here with Kenny Pickett in that offense. The Steelers defense, though, is good. They're old, though, man, also. So I'm curious to see what happens with the Steelers going forward. That's a team. Secondary wasn't very good. They were very active in the trade market looking for cornerbacks as well. I know they were a team that called multiple times about Surtain and Simmons, in on Jalen Johnson from the Bears as well. So active, aggressive team. We'll see how they play out this year. They just feel middle of the pack to me.
It's a really cool stat where the Pittsburgh Steelers and under Mike Tomlin, I don't think have ever had a losing season, but they're drafting in the teens constantly. I almost need that one tank year. That one tank year where they get that top 2 or 3 guy who's just an absolute franchise difference maker. I'll never forget the Spurs with David Robinson have their tank year, and they get Tim Duncan and put him next to David Robinson, and now you've got multiple championships coming along. I love that I think it's amazing, and I don't want them to lose, but I just feel like I mentioned the Hawks, who are always stuck in that purgatory, always good but never good enough. It's going to take a little luck hitting on some mid-rounds, later-round guys, but the culture, Mike Tomlin and has built that culture. The Rooney family has built that culture for years and years and years and years and years. We mentioned the quarterback culture with the Green Bay Packers. We'll talk about the coaches. I mentioned the coaches. I can think of 3 coaches: Chuck Noll, Bill Cowher, Mike Tomlin. That's like 50 years of coaches right there. It's pretty amazing. So big fan of what the Steelers do. Overall, Alberto coming in. He says, "Good morning, fellas. That Chelsea shirt, Scott. Sorry, Manchester fan here. That's okay. I wouldn't expect you to unfan somebody. Be a Manchester fan. Not sure which. If he's saying Manchester, he probably means United. They're the old heads there, and they wouldn't say, if you were a City fan, you'd qualify with Manchester City, but we're Manchester United, so we don't have to say we own Manchester. Hasn't quite felt like that lately, but it's still. I still know what that means in Manchester, England. Let me scroll down here as we get to the chat a little bit. Dave has a question about Desmond Ridder. He says, "Can you guys name one special trait that Desmond Ridder has shown so far?" This coming from a fan that truly likes the dude. No, I can't. When you say special, what is there that is plus about Desmond Ridder? And to be fair, most quarterbacks don't have those traits. That doesn't make him unique. There's only a few of them out there that do.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I agree. I was going to say even some of the all-time greats don't have that obvious plus physical trait. Now, granted, game has changed a little bit out there, so still looking for that if you can. But like Tom Brady, the pocket movement was unbelievable. I've never seen a quarterback navigate the pocket like he does. Peyton Manning, the cerebral aspect, the pre-snap stuff. But as far as Ridder, some of that cerebral stuff could come eventually, right? Some of the mental and those attributes, but from a physical standpoint, the arm is probably, what would you say, a C- from NFL standards in terms of strength? Maybe.
Yeah, I'd say C, just as average.
Yeah.
I think average is okay, but close enough that I wouldn't argue a C- on that.
Yeah, C-. The athleticism, the ability to be a physical playmaker is probably also a C+. C. He can run in the open field, but is he twitchy? No. Is he really strong, strapping young lad in the pocket? No. That's a big one, honestly, for me.
I want to get him some hand grips.
Yeah, God.
Walk around and just squeeze those things, squeeze that thing all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
After he fumbled again, I looked it up, and he has 10-inch hands, which aren't huge hands, but they're big enough. Yeah. I shouldn't be able to just flick the ball out of his hand whenever I want to.
More of it makes me wonder if it's more of just an outright strength thing than anything, or just, being smart in the pocket. But yeah, I don't know if he has anything. Doesn't mean he can't be a good quarterback, especially on his rookie contract. But the fact that they're going to Heineke right now, and the fact that Heineke's stats, efficiency data was like night and day, so much better again than Desmond Ridder in that last game. It'll be interesting to follow going forward. This might it's possible that Heineke takes it and runs with it for this season, but we will see, one game at a time.
Alberto follows up. He says, that Taylor Heineke is not long-term for the Falcons. Do you think Dak Prescott would be a good fit in Arthur Smith's scheme? The Cowboys might not need him next year. Yes, I think that Dak Prescott would be a great fit for Arthur Smith. No, I don't think there's any chance in Dak Prescott coming to Atlanta. He's going to be Dallas Cowboy next year. Why would that change?
Yeah, I can't imagine any reason that he's not a Cowboy next season. I know they traded for Trey Lance, but my understanding was the Trey Lance move was more about getting Dak insurance, because Dak has had a few dings here and there. But the answer is still Dak. He's probably one of the more underrated quarterbacks in this draft class. I'll be quite frank, Scott. I was a huge Dak fan at Mississippi State too. If you can be a quarterback at a program like Mississippi State and have them ranked number 1 at any point in their program in the SEC freaking West. I mean, God bless you. Dak was a dude out there, and I think he's one of the more cerebral quarterbacks in the NFL. They could use another weapon to take advantage of that big brain that he plays with, but yeah, no, there's no way the Cowboys should move on from him or get rid of him. He's probably the most underrated quarterback in the league.
Yeah, his dead cap hit next year is still 61, and to be the last year of his contract. He's got some void years, but that to me screams extension / restructure in order to clear up some cap space. I don't think Dak Prescott's going anywhere. And yes, he would be a fantastic fit for pretty much any team that needs a quarterback. The answer would be yes for Dak Prescott, Alberto. Appreciate the question. Michael Ranquillo coming in. Appreciate you, Michael. It is great to see you. He's coming in Broncos Orange with a $20 super chat. Y'all are killing it today, and it certainly makes us feel good. Says, good morning, Scott and Nick on Coast to Coast Football. Lots of love. Back at you, buddy. Hope you're doing well out in Arizona. Trade winners and losers, and then I want to jump into draft stuff. Let's just finish with Montez Sweat to the Chicago Bears. Now, Seth Walder at ESPN Analytics and I, he doesn't know who I am, but let's just say I've read his stuff. It's on ESPN, and I feel like I have more disagreements with what he has to write than just about anybody that's level-headed and isn't just out there trying to generate noise.
Yeah.
He shillelagh'd the Chicago Bears for trading that pick, gave him like a D-, saying, this is the second year in a row they've given up draft picks for a team that wasn't going anywhere. But for me, and I will agree with him if they don't re-sign him, but for me, it gives you, this to me was a trade for a young edge where they needed a pass rush that they plan on re-signing, or they wouldn't have made that move.
Yeah.
So if you do that, then if it's going to cost you a second, would it have been any cheaper in the offseason? It was still going to probably cost you a second round pick. Oh, well, he would have been a free agent. Apologies. He would have been a free agent. Apologies. So you might not have been able to get him if you didn't have the chance to work on him for the second half of the season. So is he worth a second round pick and the money?
He's a top 20 edge rusher, and this Bears team is really lacking, and he's probably a safer bet than to be a good player, obviously, than any of the draft picks right now. I don't think there's not a true number 1 edge in this class, in my opinion. A year transcendent, that guy's a blue chip talent edge. So I don't mind the move too much. I mean, it is expensive, but the Bears also still are going to own the draft, right? With the first 2 picks that they have in terms of the value of those selections. And also now they have negotiating rights / contractual rights with Montez Sweat. There was rumors that he wanted to go to Atlanta. Sorry, Falcons fans. But Bears pick's obviously better than the Falcons pick there with that second rounder, and Atlanta wasn't willing to give up that one because the quarterback situation. So now the Bears own him this season. He's a free agent at the end of the year, but they can tag him, and he'll be worth the tag for that. The Bears have so much cap space, it's going to be fine for them to use the tag. So that puts a little bit less leverage on him to be like, well, I was always going to I wanted to go Atlanta anyway. Well, now you have to play on the tag for a year when we're offering you all this guaranteed money, and you might, one play away from that dream being gone. So they have that control over him.
Well, we'll tag you, and we'll take Atlanta Falcons second round pick then, if you want to go.
Yeah.
So you can get that back. But I think when you've got a guy in the room and you've got the ability to drop $100 million on him, he's probably going to sign it. he'll probably sign it, but we'll find out just how badly he wants to get there. I want to say hello to Kenneth, and then we'll talk about some Dane Brugler's top prospects. Kenneth says Kurt Warner and Terrence Mathis have explained the Falcons' problem. It's not a quarterback problem. It's an Arthur Smith problem, or specifically play calling. Please check them out. Appreciate you, Kenneth. The problem I have with a statement like that is it's being stated like it's a fact. Now, this is an opinion of Kurt Warner and Terrence Mathis, 2 guys I have a lot of respect for. But that makes it sound like that without a doubt, factual 100%, Desmond Ridder is the guy. And if it weren't for Arthur Smith, Desmond Ridder would be a Pro Bowl type quarterback, championship level caliber quarterback. We don't know that.
No.
Now, is Arthur Smith and his play calling holding Desmond Ridder back? Yeah, I could see some of that possibly. He might be better in a better system playing for Kyle Shanahan. But there's no guarantee anywhere that we have seen thus far that means all of a sudden, if it weren't for Arthur Smith, Desmond Ridder would be the guy. So I can't take that as fact because it is not.
And to be fair, shout out to Kurt Warner. Good guy. Met him a couple of times. He's from Iowa. So actually, my dad used to work with his sister-in-law. So
And
I have
Terrence is still around here. I used to work football camps with him. I love Terrence Mathis. Ran the
yeah,
best out route in the NFL.
yeah. It's not just a quarterback problem, obviously. It's beyond that. Do you have any true like separators right now? Man beaters, if you will, as players. I don't know. Does Desmond Ridder, have enough trust to throw those guys that are closed open without putting the ball in harm's way at the same time? Maybe he doesn't have that confidence. Maybe he's not that guy. It's always more complicated than this is 100% Desmond Ridder's fault or this is 100% Arthur Smith's fault. You would hope that one of those guys is good enough that they can overcome the other one's lack of being the guy, I guess. But I think I've seen enough from Arthur Smith dealing with a variety of quarterbacks to say that I'm probably a little bit more feeling safe with him and his competency than I am with Ridder. Ridder could still end up being a quality quarterback. I'm honestly pretty surprised they're making the switch, even though Heineke did look better in the small sample size, because we're still trying to figure it out with Ridder. I probably would have given him the next 2 games, especially considering the Vikings defense has been terrible, although they're the number 1 blitz rate defense in the history of the NFL right now. So maybe that's not good, but I would have given him a little bit more time, but it's definitely more complicated than it's all this guy or it's all that guy.
Arthur Smith had a lot of success with Ryan Tannehill, who was given the boot in Miami.
Mm-hmm.
He has had more success with an aging Matt Ryan and Marcus Mariota, who is a journeyman quarterback, than Desmond Ridder is having under Arthur Smith right now. So if I'm looking at the 3 factors, right now it was better, bad. Maybe it's it's on Desmond Ridder. But again, that may be either way. I'm not saying Desmond Ridder is done, and I'm not saying that Arthur Smith stinks. I'm saying right now the combination of the 2 stinks. I know that for a fact. I'm not willing to say it's one or the other. I've seen Arthur Smith do some good things with some mediocre quarterbacks.
Mm-hmm.
And Desmond Ridder should have been playing more last year, so he wasn't coming into, and in the preseason should have gotten some snaps, so he wasn't coming into the season as basically a freaking rookie. That's a man management problem. That is an Arthur Smith problem. So there's a lot that goes to it for sure. Now, Dane Brugler, one of the rising stars, and he may have already risen. But, when we go back to when you're my age, you think Mel Kiper, he's been around forever. Dane Brugler, if you've been around less than 10 years, you're still a newbie to an old guy like me, does terrific work for The Athletic with his NFL draft analyst and such. And he came out with his big list, and he had a kind of a surprise number 1 up there, didn't he, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit of surprise number 1, but not if you've been listening to Scott and I talk this season. He has quarterback Drake May from North Carolina as his number 1 overall player in this class. Drake May, in my opinion, has always been there neck and neck with Caleb Williams. He just doesn't have the USC pizzazz. But I mean, he was a highly recruited player. He was one of the top 5 in NIL before his sophomore year last year. I mean, there's people in the know have known that Drake May is a guy. His family is all full of athletes too, Division I athletes, youngest brother of a big group. And he is probably the most NFL prototype quarterback in this class because he can do stuff out of structure. He can create plays, but his ability within structure, within the pocket, to get through reads, to just keep square in that and deliver big time throws with a very good arm are all there. So I'm not surprised. I probably still would have had Caleb Williams number 1, even though he has been struggling this season, just because, I mean, the juice behind the arm and the ability to deliver off platforms and the thickness that he plays with as a playmaker are all special to me. But I get it. You can't have every single thing be turned into backyard football. It's almost like he's almost evolving into what Russell Wilson is at peak Russell Wilson right now, which obviously is a volatile quarterback style. But Drake May, number 1, not surprised at all. If I was doing this, I probably would have Marvin Harrison Jr. number 1 overall, who ends up being Brugler's number 2 player. But given positional value, Marvin Harrison Jr. shouldn't go first overall, but as a big board, probably would be for me.
And then I would imagine he's got Caleb Williams number 3 and then Fashanu number 4.
Yes. So he has coming up, actually incorrect. He has number 4 overall, go Dogs, Brock Bowers.
That makes sense. Yep, that makes sense.
6'4", 240 tight end, dealing with the ankle injury right now, just had tightrope surgery. I think a lot of players would hang it up at this point for him, but it sounds like Brock Bowers might actually be back here to make a run. He doesn't really have anything to prove. I mean, he's won back-to-back national championships, could be one of the best tight end prospects ever. I mean, sorry, Falcons fans, but the years doing it probably add up a little bit more than the one supernova year from Kyle Pitts that we saw with Kyle Trask there in Florida. But yeah, he has Brock Bowers going number 4 overall on his big board. We'll see what happens, Scott. I mean, we're going to have plenty of debates about the positional value of Brock Bowers and everything, and taking a tight end that early with are you just punting the cap benefits of a draft pick that high when you're doing that? But it's Bowers is a different kind of player than Kyle Pitts stylistically, so it'll be fun to follow and see what he does.
Yeah, if you get Travis Kelce, you'd be happy with using a number 1 overall pick. I mean, that's fine if you get that guy. It's just how many Travis Kelces are out there. The odds are hitting it. Maybe this is the guy, but that's what they said about Kyle Pitts. And Kyle Pitts has been in a situation where either through his ability or the offense around him, and I would still say the offense around him, which is why you shouldn't have drafted Kyle Pitts in 2021, has held him back. Hopefully, Brock Bowers would not go to a situation where the quarterback is so unsettled for the first 3 years of his career. Now, ESPN runs their football power index, and they've come up with a projected draft order, and it's 1 Cardinals, 2 Bears via Carolina, 3 New York Giants, 4 Bears again with their own pick, and then 5 Washington Commanders. Arizona's sitting at number 1. You go to NFL mock draft database and it says Arizona taking Marvin Harrison Jr. number 1 overall. Is there any way that happens?
I don't think it's possible in this situation to do that with the demands of the quarterbacks, unless, I guess anything is possible if both quarterbacks get hurt, knock on wood for their sakes, but then things can change, obviously. But there's just going to be too much demand for that quarterback. We've already spent, half the show talking about if you don't have that guy, good freaking luck, right? So teams, even though there's no guarantees about that, are going to be wanting to take a shot on those guys. And right now it does seem like there's a very definitive line between quarterback 1 and 2 and everybody else. I mean, I listened to Dane Brugler and Nate Tice talk about the draft too. They have a pretty good podcast. And I do a lot of dog walks, so I have time to listen to podcasts. And they talked about how Drake May and Caleb Williams might be their only first-round graded quarterbacks in this class. It's a deep class, but it's deep in like the day 2, early day 3 range. So going to be fun and interesting to follow to see what happens. But Marvin Harrison Jr., unbelievable player. The hard part here, Scott, is that it's a really deep wide receiver class too, and that there's wide receivers available a lot. So while wide receivers aren't necessarily rare, their impact is massive, and Marvin Harrison Jr. is about as sure of a thing as we've seen, given his athleticism and combined with his technician ability. So incredible player. I wouldn't be against it, but as a quarterback, as not a non-quarterback, I can't see it.
If I'm the Arizona Cardinals and I'm sitting with that draft order that I'm looking at right now, number 1, again, this is on ESPN through their FPI, 1 Cardinals, 2 Bears, 3 Giants. I'm trying to swap places with the Giants. Mm-hmm. I think you could probably still get your guy at number 3. And if the Bears do something like, hey, we're sticking with Justin Fields, we're going to take Marvin Harrison, well, then there's still another quarterback on there, but I could trade down again. I could pick up another. I could literally come out of this thing with 4 first-round draft picks moving down, at least, Nick.
Yeah. I would probably hope to spread those out over multiple years.
Of course.
Yeah.
But what would it take for the Giants to go from 3 to 1? It would take their 3 and at least another first rounder. It would take your 2025 first. So you're coming out of there with 2. I've got 3 and a 2025. So I've got 2 first round picks.
Yeah.
All right. Well, the Chicago Bears decided we're sticking with Justin Fields. We're going to take Marvin. I'm going to call him Marvin Williams his whole life. I swear to God, I am. Marvin Harrison Jr. Well, now to go out of 3, it's going to be a little more expensive. There's still one of those quarterbacks up there. And I could get 3 first-round draft picks. I could get 3 first-round draft picks to come out of 3 for that last quarterback, like a Trey Lance did coming out of that spot. I could have 5 first-round draft picks and still have and still hitch my wagon to Kyle Murray if that's the way they think they want to go. Um, that would be pretty amazing. That'd be a very interesting. Again, a lot of that depends on, do we want to hitch our wagon to Kyle Murray? If we don't, then you have to take your quarterback if you're the Arizona Cardinals.
Yeah. Tough, man. Tough. It's they could also get a lot for trading Kyler Murray too, right? He could be available and just take the quarterback. And also talking about trading former first round picks. Dave says, I think Justin Fields is a dark horse trade option for the Falcons. I don't know how dark horse he is, given how much Scott and I have talked about that possibility, but there will be some quarterbacks on the move this offseason. It feels like last season was the first time we really saw this massive quarterback carousel. Really, I mean, maybe even 2 seasons ago, but guys are flipping more than they have before. The issue is the elite quarterbacks with any sort of youth are typically not available. It's guys that have the but attached to their name.
Daniel Jones.
Yep, Daniel Jones.
Kyler Murray, who has, but he's been injured and he's undersized. Justin Fields. It's as expensive as the top of the shelf second contract quarterbacks are. What do I want to reset and start with a rookie and a rookie deal, or do I want to pay Daniel Jones $40 million? I know which I want to do, and I think I know what the Giants will want to do if they get the chance to get a quarterback in the top 3 this year.
I mean, honestly, just from a team building standpoint, and it's not obviously a sustainable model here, but like signing a former highly drafted quarterback that has had flashes, but is still getting that 1-year mercenary contract might be the move. If you're looking to kick the can while still being competitive for a year. And the quarterback who stands out for me, who's actually been pretty damn good statistically this season overall, is like Baker Mayfield, who, again, not a great quarterback by any means.
Russell Wilson.
But
when you talk about statistics, he's got 16 touchdowns and 4 interceptions.
The other ones are not as good, but the like guys like that, I think that would be my probably methodology for attacking the quarterback position if I didn't have the dude there, so that way you're not committed long
and hope to get lucky.
Yes, exactly. But what you don't want to do is commit to that elite money to a middle class player, because that puts you in a tough situation. And then are you competing? Maybe barely, but then it's like, well, we're committed to him. We can't move on. So it makes it certainly very tough.
You've used the Andy Dalton reference a lot when talking about, doing really well when you've got a cheap quarterback who's playing well. And then when he starts eating up more of your cap, he's not good enough to elevate cheaper players around him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, he's one that comes to mind. You could probably come up with a more recent pertinent option as well, but you don't want to commit to good quarterbacks paying them elite money. That just makes it really, really tough for those guys. Like the Saints paying Derek Carr that money. Derek Carr's an awesome quarterback. I mean, he really is. Consistently been top 12, good arm. But you're paying him big money. You're attached to him. Russell Wilson. I mean, the cap hits are going to be big, and now you're kind of stuck there. So it's a tough situation for that. There's just not a middle class quarterback market, really.
John Harrell comes in. He says, I saw a mock draft where the Atlanta Falcons got Colorado's Shedeur Sanders. I'm not a fan of his. Where does Brugler have Shedeur Sanders in this list, if at all? Because it's not for sure that he's coming out.
Sanders does make the list. He is at number 24 overall, 6'2", 215 quarterback. He's had some pretty good moments out here. And I don't... John, maybe you don't like his play style, but one thing you cannot question about Sanders is that guy is freaking tough, because that Colorado line, it reminds me of not Derek Carr, David Carr versus the Texans. I mean, he is getting lit up playing that style of offense behind what Colorado has as a pretty damn poor offensive line. So Sanders, the ability to play, I'm almost worried that he's going to develop some scar tissue in the league, because he's taking so many hits right now that it's going to mess with his process. He's not going to trust his line and look to bail early, but he's been playing tough. He's been delivering very catchable balls. His arm is just okay. He's enough of a runner to be a scrambler. I don't think he's a true playmaker in space with the ball in his hands, but he's a good quarterback. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if he did come out in this class, if he got a mid to late first round selection. I think somebody would take him there.
Yeah, he's graded around 30, where you see him. If he's 24, the Falcons, if they're drafting somewhere, let's say they finish the season around 10-7 and make a playoff, they'll be drafted in the 20s. Then taking Shedeur Sanders in that area is certainly not a reach. Looking at this list, what would you consider the strength of this class in the first round? outside of the top two quarterbacks? You mentioned there's some depth at wide receiver. How about some in the trenches, defensive side of the ball? What would you consider the strength?
It's an offensive draft. Just across the board, it is unbelievable at offense. This top 50 is littered with quarterbacks, it's littered with wide receivers, and it's littered with offensive tackles. So there is going to be value to be had at the premium positions on the offense. I don't see there's a couple of tackles who might kick inside, like Barton from Duke, who's a really, really good technical player, but no running backs really worth the top 50. I'd be surprised. Maybe we have 3 or 4 drafted in the top 100. It's just not a really, really talented class, in my opinion, at running back. And tight end falls off an absolute cliff after Brock Bowers this season. But wide receiver, offensive tackle, and quarterback are amazing. I think there are 10 to 12 wide receivers in his top 50. I think there are about 8 to 10 offensive tackles, and I think 7 or 8 quarterbacks listed in this top 50. There's just very offensive heavy class and not a very good defensive class.
We're only about 12 weeks away from the Senior Bowl.
Uh-huh.
We're there. I'm thinking, I gotta get my credential. It's gotta be getting close. I gotta start making plans. That's coming up fast.
Time's coming.
It's close. Dave has a good question. Guys, what high-end play caller is not an egomaniac? Don't they almost have to be egomaniacs? To a certain extent. But a lot of the coordinators, they're mad scientists to a certain extent, especially if you go down to the college level. They don't want to be head coaches because they don't want to have to deal with the BS. They don't want to have to recruit. They don't want to have to deal with alumni. They just want to coach. That's what they want to do. And they end up terminal at the coordinator position. But some of the guys that came to mind for me, Dave, Andy Reid, I don't consider him an egomaniac. He's a very good offensive play guy. Mike McDaniel is very different. I don't consider him an egomaniac because he's been humbled through addiction. You spend some time going through recovery. It's hard to be too big of an egomaniac. And I think one of the most low-key, really, really good offensive minds in this game right now is Shane Steichen, Indianapolis Colts. And he certainly is not an egomaniac. At least, he might be, but they hide it well, which if you're self-aware enough to put on a good show and seem humble, then you're not an egomaniac. So, but Shane Steichen is a guy there, but those are just 3 off the top of my head. So there's a lot of different people. These guys all have egos. It's the only way they make it to the very top of their game, of their profession. They're all very confident, but they're not all brash, cocky. In fact, sometimes I feel like those are the ones that are, thou dost protest too much. And you're trying to fool people like the Josh McDaniels of the world, like the Charlie Weisses of the world.
Are we compensating for something here?
Yeah, that you really are. You're the emperor with no clothes.
I've been there once. Not a good place to be. But yeah, no, it's a pretty fun overall big board for Dane here. If you're looking for offensive tackle, quarterback, or wide receiver, this does seem to be a pretty good year. Continuing through his top 10 here. We mentioned Brock Bowers at 4. Then you get your big 2 tackles in this class. Olu Fashanu at 5. Joe Alt at 6. I would have Olu above Alt, but there is some rumblings that Alt has some fans as offensive tackle 1. I just don't think he's as flexible. I have some issues with him being a little bit of a stiff, if you will, given his size. He's a 6'7", 320. Just doesn't move the way Olu does. After that, 7. I think there's a line after that top 6 there. Personally, then you get Dallas Turner, first defensive player off the board at 7, edge rusher from Alabama. Keon Coleman, who's had an unbelievable year at Florida State this season, coming in at 8, wide receiver from Florida State via Michigan State, transfer portal guy this year. If you haven't had a chance to watch Keon Coleman highlights this year, do yourself a favor and plug it in. Just type it in YouTube. Obviously, highlights, there's no way to scout, but it's a lot of fun to watch him play. He's an unbelievable player. And then you have 9 overall, Leatu Latu, edge rusher from UCLA. He's going to be very interesting because he had to medically retire from Washington due to a neck injury. Transfers to UCLA, gets cleared to play and is playing, but his medicals are going to be very concerning and fun to follow. And then 10 overall, you got offensive tackle J.C. Latham, who is erratic but interesting because he is 6'6", 360, and he does not move like a 360 guy. He moves like a 320 kind of guy, 330 guy, and that makes a difference in the NFL when you're that big. There's always a little bit of sometimes there can be concerns because for every DeJuan Jones, who is playing great football for the Browns right now, who's an absolute unit as well at right tackle, there's a Falele. You remember him from Minnesota, who's just way too big and not coordinated enough. Or even
Like my
Makai.
fourth highest video ever of views is this monster, 400-pound monster on my YouTube channel.
Not very good though. And then also you have Mekhi Becton, who was big, massive athlete, but just injured constantly with the size and stuff. So it's interesting to follow. But yeah, another 3 offensive tackles in the top 10, 3 wide receivers. I'll put in Brock Bowers at wide receiver, honest to God, and then to quarterbacks.
I have one player I want to ask you about because I've seen him starting to get some love here lately. Is LSU wide receiver Malik Neighbors? Where is he coming in on Dane, and what do you think about him?
I think the battle for wide receiver 2 in this class, not putting Brock Bowers in the box there, is a 1A, 1B, 1C situation where I would be most happy not having to pick from them and just taking the last one available.
Right.
It's that situation. They're all slightly different, but you have obviously Keon Coleman, who's this big X acrobat, can do stuff after the catch. I mean, they have Keon Coleman returning freaking punts, Scott, and he's like 6'4", 215. It's bizarre to watch, but he's a playmaker. Malik Neighbors for LSU has been awesome this season, explosive. I cannot wait. You guys get your popcorn. LSU, Alabama this weekend. You have Kool-Aid McKinstry, who's the number 1 cornerback for Dane Brugler, versus Malik Neighbors, who's anywhere from wide receiver 2 to 4, depending on who you ask. The other name that's worth mentioning, Scott, is Odunze from Washington, 6'3", 220. I saw him play live, Washington versus Oregon, and he put that Oregon guy who we were, saying, oh, this guy's got some pretty good tape, made him look foolish in that game. So any of those wide receivers could end up being wide receiver 2. Dane does have Neighbors as wide receiver 4, technically, but you have Keon 8, Rome Odunze at 11, and then Malik Neighbors coming in at 13. So it's a tight cluster there. Yeah.
That's when you start looking, it's like, don't ask me about the order. Well, you've got this guy ranked at 20. I'm like, yeah, but flip a coin between 11 and 20. It's the same guy. I have to put them in some order.
Yeah, and if you're looking for like a true X on the boundary, the guy with some size and length, then you're going Keon Coleman. If you're looking for somebody who can do a little bit of both inside, outside, but physical, can do some big slot stuff, you're probably looking for Rome Odunze. If you're looking for somebody who's a little bit more built like DJ Moore, who's more of a Z, can do some yak stuff, a little bit more of an explosive athlete, you're probably looking at Malik Neighbors. It's flavors of ice cream, Scott. We've used that reference a lot, but we're in Neapolitan right now. You digging for the strawberry, the chocolate, the vanilla? I like them all. I don't really care. Give me whatever one's the last one there. I'll be happy.
I'm a scoop right between that strawberry and chocolate for me. I want a little of both.
There you go.
Chris Jenkins, hello there. I want to say hello. Came in a little bit late. Glad you're here. He says, if you're Sean Payton and stay with Russ, what's the first position of need would you take in the draft? Now, we're going to say, obviously it depends on who is the best player available because you can fit a guy in any of those positions. The Broncos need playmakers across the board. Mm-hmm. But let's just say you've got 5 guys that are all equal, Nick, on your board at wide receiver, at edge, at corner, at offensive tackle. Where would you go?
I mean, it's so hard to say right now, not to just totally derail us here, but like, are Jerry Jeudy and Cortland Sutton here? What does that look like? I mean, they've been in the trade market here year after year after year. If one of those guys is gone, wide receiver moves way up for me. You're stuck with the offensive tackle stuff, and you're stuck with your guards as well. I mean, I think right now Scott Garrett Bowles has played well enough that I'm not looking to create a hole, especially because he probably has 3 to 5 more years of good play, theoretically, given his age. So I don't know about that. I probably would lean edge here just to get another guy in there, especially with the contracts of Jonathan Cooper and Baron Brownie. Next year is their last year of control, so you're gonna have to turn over that room a good bit anyway. So get another guy in there, add a log to the fire, if you will, to keep that position healthy and talented and cost controlled as well. That stands out for me. But honestly, Scott, the ones that stand out for me, if I was going to look for, you're talking first round here, I still am on the interior defensive line train, if that's at all possible. Just somebody who has a little bit of flexibility there. DJ Jones will be on the last year of his contract. Zach Allen can't do it alone. I've seen enough of Jonathan Harris now to know that I'm not a big fan of what he's bringing to the table overall. I think Hennessy can be fine. Hennessing can be fine as like your last interior defensive lineman off the board or off the rotation there. But
Matt
Henningsen.
Henningsen and Matt Hennessy, confusing between the Falcons and Broncos. Here, I'm going to cut you off on this, Nick, because Chris, what I think is how this board's going to end up falling, it'll probably end up being a wide receiver. Between the strength of this draft and that Judy could very possibly be traded, and Sutton, you're going to have to work out something with that contract probably, whether it's a trade or a restructure or whatnot. I think it's going to end up being wide receiver based on best player available, where in that range end up picking, or an offensive tackle. I just don't. I'd like it to be an edge, but I don't think it's going to be corner possibly. But it feels like the strength of this draft would be a big need at wide receiver, Nick.
Yeah, I'm dating back. What year was Sean Payton's first year in New Orleans? I don't even know.
I don't remember. I've looked it up 100 times.
Well, dating back to 2007, they've only taken a wide receiver in the first round twice, and both of them were kind of late-ish first round.
2006 was his first year.
Okay, so they took Robert Meacham, if you guys remember him from Tennessee, 27 overall, and then they also ended up taking a guy who's been on so many teams now, Brandon Cooks at 20th overall. So they have taken some wide receivers, but this has been a team that's been very offensive tackle, cornerback, defensive line. Those are the areas that they've really attacked in the draft. Now, is that a Mickey Loomis thing? Is that a Sean Payton thing? We'll find out, I guess, over time when data happens. But they haven't really gone after wide receiver round one. It's been more of a day two position for them.
We'll see where they end up, but I would think based on the draft, where it stands, I would go wide receiver or probably cornerback. I would like it to be cornerback or edge, but I don't know that the value is going to be there when the Broncos pick.
And a lot of it too, Scott, I think is going to depend on what happens with Russell Wilson. If you are keeping Russell Wilson, your cornerback and your wide receiver plays are much more immediate.
But then it was Chris said that. He goes, Russ is going to be there. Otherwise, it's quarterback.
It's a quarterback, or it could be, if you don't love the quarterback there, I could see a situation where you really are kicking the can for a season. Maybe you draft a guy round 4, and you run with Jarrett Stidham for a year. And it's not going to be pretty, but you're having to get over that Russell Wilson dead cap hit. And in that case, I'm either all in on the offense or trenches in general. I mean, we've seen it with offensive linemen and especially defensive tackle too. It typically takes 2 to 3 seasons, really to see them start to come into their own. And if you're dealing with that Russell Wilson dead cap hit stuff anyway, you're going to stink probably anyway. Have that developmental year be one of those years when it's you're still a couple years off competing. And then by the time they're really coming into their own, that's when you should be ready to go, start spending money and be aggressive. So it really does come down to what happens with Wilson.
Keith asked the question, I can't remember, but was Puka Nacua on your radar last year? Not for me. I didn't see him at Senior Bowl, and I don't remember him coming out.
I watched him a little bit. He had injury history, so he was a little bit low for me, and he looked, kind of okay at everything. I remember him at Washington as well. He was actually on a team they had, I think, McMillan and Odunze and Puka Nacua, who then transferred to BYU. So did not watch too much of him, I'll be honest. Once you get to those round 4, round 5 guys, unless if I was doing draft full time, probably would have gotten to him, but doing the Broncos, Falcons, real life on top of the draft, it's hard to get to every single one. But no, I knew of Puka, did not spend much time evaluating him or scouting him.
Brandon's going to be our last question here. Asks us about it, where the Falcons are scheduled to draft. Could there be a pass rusher in there? Chop Robinson could be in that area. Kid from Ohio State, JT Tuimalu.
Mm-hmm.
If Latu falls, he could be there. Braylon Trice is someone I've seen mocked out of Washington. So that's about where the pass rushers are going to be, Nick. They're not going to be high-end first-rounders. They could be back-end first-rounders, like a George Karlaftis type, who has turned into a very good player for the Kansas City Chiefs.
You know how much I loved Karlaftis, Scott.
I know.
You
knocked it at 8 a couple times to the Atlanta Falcons.
Yeah, he's good. A name that I would not sleep on with the Falcons. He was considered a top 10 pick entering the season. He's kind of fallen a bit to a range where I think his talent matches more mid first round, that 15 to 23 range. But Jared Verse still makes a lot of sense for the Falcons. He's got, rock'em sock'em robot hands, just kind of bats guys around. He's not always the best finisher, but you're a team that's definitely more of the pocket crunching variety here with strength and trying not to blitz when you can. And I think Verse brings that ability to 6'4", 260, has multiple years now of contribution as well. So it's not just this 1-year wonder by any means. So yeah, he stands out. He's be one I'd keep an eye on. There's some other interesting names further down the list here too that could stand out. I mean, we know that edge is very much a athletic position. So maybe somebody, kills it at the combine and you're like, oh, wow, well, let's bet on that. Brugler also has Chris Braswell from Alabama, the other edge rusher, 32 overall. So keep an eye on him. Jack Sawyer from Ohio State, the other Ohio State 164, 265. He's interesting. Kind of an inside-outside guy who might be worth following here. You got Rook Arohoro. Yes, I said that right. Rook Arohoro from Texas. He's 6'4", 285. So he's a little bit of an inside-outside guy. And I know there's also some interest in Landon Jackson from Arkansas, who's 6'7", 270. So there's some fun guys there.
Yes, and that's for me, pass rusher is still the biggest weakness outside of the quarterback and offensive line, not in the offensive play overall for the Atlanta Falcons is edge. For one guy, take quarterback out of the equation, pass rushing edge is still the biggest weakness on this team. So we'll see how that one goes. Keith Brugman says, thank you so much, Scott and Nick. Really appreciate Coast to Coast NFL Fridays. It's our pleasure. Thank you. I want to say thank you to those who supported the show today. Dave came in with a super chat. Jackie came in with a super sticker. Troy with a super chat. And Michael with a big orange super chat to help support the show. That is the most direct way to support the things that Nick and I do. We are going to get out of here now. It's time to get going. We will be back on Monday. We will talk the Falcons podcast first, and then we will have Broncos for breakfast after. We might go a little bit longer on the Falcons podcast since they're playing and it's a bye week for the Broncos. But we'll be back at 9 o'clock on any of these channels that you're watching right now. If you haven't already, hit the like and subscribe and share. Make sure you get those notifications so when you know we're going to be live, because we like it when you're here. We appreciate the interaction. Looking forward to some good football. Got some baseball games tomorrow. I'm actually kind of excited about those. And then a big weekend. I think they're going to be over in time to come back and watch LSU in Alabama. So that could be a lot of fun. Nick, any last words before we get out of here?
I just want to give another shout out to Dane Brugler for helping provide some of the content for us to talk about today. Top 50, obviously, it's going to be pretty volatile. Still, we got a lot of data to collect still and guys to watch, but some interesting names too. I know we got a lot of Falcons fans in here, and by way of that, a lot of Georgia Bulldogs too. Some surprising Bulldogs making the list here, Scott, at the very end. We have Ladd McConkey, wide receiver, 5'11", 185, but man, that guy's just always open. What a tough player for them. I've appreciated Ladd McConkey there. And then he also has Carson Beck making it at 50 overall. He's only played 8 games, but Beck is, I have not watched much Georgia this season, but excited to turn into that.
You get a chance to watch Georgia late. They play a lot longer than everybody else.
I think they play Missouri this week too. And Missouri's feisty. I think Missouri's going to go in and, get beat by 21, but that's a good Mizzou team overall. And if you have a chance, if you're watching that game, check out, this is way too early, but probably your consensus 2025 wide receiver one is on the Missouri Tigers in Luther Burden III. He has been unbelievable. I mean, he's not Marvin Harrison, but God damn, he's an awesome player. So check out the Missouri Tigers, Luther Burden, if you're watching the Dogs versus the Tigers this week.
Yeah, we start hitting draft. Nick starts getting all feisty. So appreciate everybody being here. Thank you again to our super chat supporters and everybody else for hitting that like, subscribe, and share. And we enjoy all of the interaction in the chat. That's why we do this live. Otherwise, follow us on Twix and Twitter, and you will get the podcast version. So if you want to listen to it after the fact too. But on that note, we're going to get out of here. Enjoy your football Fridays. Thanks for being here, everybody. We will see you next time.
Peace.